Hey, it's Dr. Shantae, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Say you are on a long haul flight to London, and depending on what level of access and budget, you can be on the same flight having a very different experience. So, one group goes to first class, one group goes to business economy or economy plus, and then there's another group in economy. And as they're exiting the plane, one group of people is like, oh my gosh, that was the best flight. The seats were so roomy and comfy. The food was delicious. It was gourmet. They gave us these plushy blankets and the pillows were so soft. I mean, it was like Saks Fifth Avenue quality. But if you were in economy, you're like, come again? Because the seats were tight and snug. I didn't have a whole lot of leg room, and the food was mid. We didn't have any luxury snacks. And then in Economy Plus, they're having a different experience. They're like, well, it wasn't like Saks Fifth Avenue quality, but we did get a nice little pouch and it had earplugs in it and it had a nice little face mask in it. And, the blanket was soft and all the things. And so a conflict ensues because everybody is talking about that's not how it was. This is what I experienced. You are wrong. And in truth, nobody's wrong. Okay, nobody's wrong. Each of those experiences is very much valid, but it's a great metaphor for how so much conflict that exists in families, in institutions, in our country tend to bubble up because everybody might be in the same flight, they might be in the same family, they might be in the same country, but they are having a very different experience. And that variance in experience is one of the reasons why it is so hard for us to get along. Let's talk about it. Keep watching. So at the micro level, I think family systems are a really great example of how this scenario plays out because sibling A might say, oh my gosh, I just love my dad. He was the best dad in the world. And siblings B, C, and D might be like, or they might look at each other like, okay, if you say so. And it's like, what? He's always been there. He's so supportive. And they might say, to you, he was like that with you, but he wasn't like that with us. And then, here come the fisticuffs because in many families, the dynamics exist where maybe somebody is the golden child and somebody is the black sheep and somebody is the scapegoat or somebody's considered problematic and what have you. And so you can literally be born to the same family. You can literally grow up in the same household. You can literally have the same biological parents and have a very different upbringing. And there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, the parent, and especially this happens when there are huge age gap. When there are huge age gap families and siblings, this is really, really common because I'll even use my own sister, for example. So I am the oldest. Imagine that. Eldest daughter is where you at. Okay. So I am the oldest and my mother had me when she was very young. She was 18 years old. My sister comes along 10 years later when my mom is 28. I want you to think about your life, your quality of life, the resources you have, the education you have, your access to career and money and all the things. I want you to think about the difference between what you have available and what you know at 18 versus what you have available and what you know at 28. So suffice it to say that me and my sister have the same mother, but we didn't have the same parent. We did not have the same parent because parenting from scarcity and inexperience and immaturity from a perspective of like, what do you know at 18? Okay. Like a lot of people think like, well, I'm an adult at 18. Give me a break. Okay. There's so much that you don't know. And then when you bring a whole human life into it, and now you suddenly have these very grown up responsibilities when you can't even afford to live on your own and all the things, that is going to be one experience. My sister, on the other hand, so what my mother had access to and available when my sister was 5 years old versus when I was 5 years old is drastically different. By then, my mother had education. By then, my mother could live independently. By then, my mother had a job title. By then, my mother had discretionary income. And so my sister was the one who got the car at 16. My sister was the one who went on family vacations to Disney and that sort of thing, and Lake Geneva, because we're Midwest people. So Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and that sort of thing. And so it is very possible to have the same parents, the same household, be at the same institution, be at the same job, and yet be having very different experiences with leadership, very different experiences with authority, very different experiences with parents or people who are in charge. And the thing is, all of those experiences are valid. All of those experiences are valid. I think it is important for us to understand the difference between agreement and validation. Validation is acknowledging that somebody's experience makes sense to them. I see how you could see it like that. I definitely understand your point of view. Based on what you said, I see how you arrived at that conclusion. Okay, that is validating. That is seeing them where they are. Agreement is endorsing that interpretation as truth. And that is not the same thing. And too often when we have these fights in families, in politics, at work, and so many other places, it is because we are locked in this battle trying to get other sides to agree to endorse somebody else's interpretation as truth, when that is really subjective. Okay, it is very subjective because even though we might be living in the same country, we have not all had the same access. Even though we're living in the same country, we have not had the same opportunities. Even though we're living in the same country, we have not all been viewed through the same lens of equality. And so, of course, there's going to be variance in that experience. And so, even though it hasn't been your experience, it doesn't mean that it's not a valid experience. And a lot of times when I see fighting and back and forth in the comments, that really is what it boils down to, because each person is speaking from where they were sitting on the plane. And then when we zoom out and look at this at a macro level, because we must always zoom out and look at the bigger picture, I think algorithms, even YouTube is a perfect example of how this plays out, because you can have two groups of people using the exact same app, using the exact same platform, watching the exact same Netflix, and have drastically different recommendations, drastically different content, drastically different feed, okay? Because the algorithm pushes your truth. The algorithm pushes your interest. The algorithm pushes what you seem to engage with, what you seem to comment on, what you seem to gravitate towards. And so that is your personal experience with that particular platform. And a lot of times when people are getting reinforcement in these echo chambers, okay, because there's so much content that reinforces your beliefs. There's so much content that reinforces your value system. There's so much content that validates the experience that you have. And you're like, yes, this is truth. But the algorithm is not doing that. The algorithm isn't showing you truth. The algorithm is showing you yourself. That's what the algorithm is doing. And so at the same time, somebody who also has Netflix has different recommendations based on your history, based on what you watched. If you like this, you'll love that. And they are customizing and they are tailoring an experience based on your personal preferences. And so when we have these ideological debates, and I think that we have forgotten how to debate, but we'll talk about that later. Actually, I usually recommend books here, but there is an excellent TED Talk by a philosophy professor, Dr. Michael Sandel. Michael Sandel, and it's called The Lost Art of Democratic Debate. Highly recommend. Actually, it might even be on YouTube. You should look into that. You may not have to go to the TED website, but The Lost Art of Democratic Debate, it's excellent. But I digress. So when we're having these ideological debates, so much of what fuels the discourse is feelings, not necessarily facts, okay? But your experience feels factual to you. Like, well, yes, this actually happened. And so this is valid. Yes, it is valid. But experience is not necessarily evidence. Okay. Not necessarily evidence. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. But when you're talking about larger ideological ideas, it is important to consider. This is why I say it's important to zoom out. It's important to consider the numbers. Okay. It's important to consider, is this an exclusive, unique situation, or is this something larger? Is it a social phenomena? And a lot of times when we come locked and loaded into the comments and we come locked and loaded into some of these ideological debates, we are framing it from a place of lived experience, personal experience. We'll see what had happened was, and my auntie, and once upon a time at band camp. It's that. Okay. And I'm not saying that anecdotal support doesn't have value and doesn't have merit. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. At the same time, I think it is important for us to get to a place where we have space for more than one perspective, even if it's not yours. It is important to have space to consider that, maybe dad was a superhero to me, but not so to my brother, but not so to my sister. Or, maybe that mom was the best thing since sliced bread to me, but maybe not so to my brother, maybe not so to my cousin. That maybe we had a different experience with the same person. And I can hold space for that. Even though that hasn't been my experience, I can still validate that that was yours. I can still say that that has merit and worth. And I can also understand why we have arrived at different conclusions when we show up to the voting booth. I can understand why we arrive at different conclusions, or we're taking different courses of action when it comes to family emergencies. I can understand why you might be a first responder, boots on the ground, I'm showing up to the ER, and why somebody else might be like, okay, well, let me know, keep me posted. Because that also happens in families. Like, why aren't you here? Why didn't you immediately drop everything? Why didn't you just come? Well, that experience fuels subsequent decisions. That experience fuels the kind of relationship that we have with people. It fuels the kind of relationship that we have with institutions like schools and churches and law enforcement and the courts. Like, all of that impacts and influences how we show up. And so I think it is important for us not to always agree, okay, not to always endorse one view as truth, but I do think that there is some merit. I do think that there is some merit in recognizing that there are multiple points of view based on very real lived experiences, and based on those experiences and the subsequent consequences of those experiences, that people are going to show up to this issue, people are going to show up to this family, people are going to show up to this situation in different ways. And even though I may not agree with it, even though that may not be what I would have done, I am choosing not to just wholesale discount. I am choosing not to insult. I am choosing not to eviscerate. I am choosing not to call you, you're effing stupid, like you're dumb. Okay, boom, we're done here. I'm choosing not to do that. And I can just take a step back and say, okay, I see how you got there. I don't agree with that. I don't endorse that. And I'm just not going to engage with that. I'm not going to engage with you on that level. And I'm going to set a boundary here. I think that is a much healthier approach than the naming, the shaming, the blaming, the fighting that we tend to do in these public discourses. And before we get out of here, let's talk about what this does to our psyche. So when somebody challenges our experience, when somebody comes at us and say, that's not what happened, that wasn't how our family was, dad really wasn't really like that, or what do you mean? There's no racism in this country. What do you mean? There's no such thing as like gender inequality. What? When people say things like that, okay, and you have a very different experience and you have anecdotal support and you have the receipts, right, that this very much exists. When somebody challenges you, psychologically, it feels like dismissal. It feels like erasure. It feels like gaslighting. Like, are you kidding me right now? Am I being pranked? Am I being punked? It feels like a threat to your sense of identity. It feels like a threat to your sense of self because our beliefs form, because our experiences inform our beliefs, our choices, our voting patterns, our family structure. Experience informs all of it. Okay. So when somebody comes along and tries to discount it or wipe it off the board, it reads in the body, it reads in the brain, it reads in the psyche like an existential threat. Like it's almost like you're saying, I don't matter, or it doesn't matter, or that didn't happen, or it can't be true for you because it wasn't true for me. So what your nervous system hears is you're wrong, you're lying, you're crazy, get the f out of here. It's all noise. You're just looking for something to complain about. You're being overly sensitive. Like, give me a break. It feels very dismissive and it's distressing. It's alarming. It's wow, because we are hardwired for love and belonging. Yeah, no, we try to do the Han Solo. We try to go it alone. And the loneliness epidemic is, first of all, loneliness and isolation reads as trauma in the body. Did you know that? Medical studies have shown, why am I excited about that? It's the nerd part. Sorry, it's the nerd part. But medical studies have shown that prolonged isolation reads as trauma in the body, and that prolonged isolation can be as deadly to your physical body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Take a look at the book Together by Dr. Vivek Murthy. I know I've recommended it on this channel before, but I will be sure to drop it in the description below. So we are trying to force ourselves to be these rugged individuals, right? But we heal in community. We thrive in community. We're hardwired for connection and belonging. And so when you try to be in community with somebody who just wholesale dismisses your experience and just wholesale dismisses things that have hurt you and things that have shaped you and things that have informed your belief system, it is extremely hurtful. And then if you have any sort of trauma-based experience, any sort of dismissal or denial of that puts you in fight, flight, fawn, freeze. Like, what? What? You feel like you have to defend yourself, which is why I cannot stress enough how important it is to hold space, to make room for experiences that are not your own. And some people struggle to do that because hearing your experience for some people destabilizes theirs. They don't want to look at it through a new lens. They don't want to believe that somebody that they love or esteem so much could do that. Some of our favorite musicians, some of our favorite actors, some of our favorite leaders, and you've bought their books and you've got their whole collection of albums and you've got their whole filmography, and then you find out they did some really reprehensible things, like some of these people coming out of these files. Okay. All right. Okay. And it's destabilizing. It's like, what? I don't want to believe that. I don't want to, because now I have decisions to make about how I'm going to continue to engage, and I don't like that. It feels uncomfortable. Now I feel judged by being adjacent to it, or I feel judged by continuing to support it. Now this ball has suddenly been thrust into my court and I don't feel comfortable dealing with this. And now I feel like I'm under scrutiny. And so now I'm coming out fighting, and punching and defending and shutting down. Like, oh my gosh, can we just not, can we just have Thanksgiving dinner? Okay. Can we just have Christmas dinner? Can we just, can we just have drinks? Can we just talk about the kids? So how's work? Okay. And so whenever somebody else's experience challenges our own, I think that a hallmark of emotional maturity, I think a hallmark of maturity in general and good communication is being able to acknowledge that two things can be true. That somebody can be immensely talented, gifted, have written some of the best music or art or composed some of the best symphonies in the world, and be deeply disappointing, deeply offensive, deeply abusive in other areas of life. Two things can be true, okay? Two things can be true. Your experience with mom can be true, and so can your brothers. Your experience with dad can be true, and so can your sisters. Does that make sense? So I'd like to leave you with some questions. I have my trusty notes. I always have my trusty notes. Okay. Here's some questions I want you to consider. Question number 1. Whose experience am I discounting because it doesn't match mine? So if you find yourself doing that, if you find yourself locked and loaded in the comments and you are dismissing somebody's experience, just think about, like, who am I doing that to? Okay. And what might be the impact of that? And more importantly, why am I doing that? Why do I need to discount your experience in order for mine to be true? Okay. Number 2, am I defending my reality or my identity? Because there's a difference. Okay. Am I defending my reality? Like, here is what happened? Or has my experience become my identity? Like, I've built a whole persona around this, and this is my story, and I've been sticking to it. And if anybody challenges that, then it's like, it says something about me and who I am, and I can't deal with that, and now it's destabilizing. So what is really being defended here? Are you defending your reality, or are you defending your identity? Number 3, what would it cost me to say your experience is real even if mine was different? What does that cost? And I will tell you that tends to go a long way. Some people are like, you know what? Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for seeing my hurt. Thank you for recognizing that this is real, rather than saying you're wrong, that didn't happen, or that's not important, or minimizing it or dismissing it in some sort of way. And the bigger picture, if we cannot hold space at a micro level, if we cannot hold space for different experiences in families, how in the world are we going to do it as a nation? How? Like, if we can't do it here, how are we going to do it there? And the key to all of this is this. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You just need to know that your experience was real, and so does everybody else, even if it wasn't theirs, that we do not have to agree in order for it to be valid. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope that it gave you something to chew on, something to think about, something to consider as we move forward. Because honestly, there's 2 things that I'm always concerned about in the way that we show up in the world with all of this technology and social media and platforms and all the rest of it. Is number 1, who am I becoming? What is this turning me into? And do I like myself? Do I like myself when I'm on Instagram? Do I like myself when I'm on Facebook? Do I like myself when I'm on YouTube? It's just like when you're in a relationship with somebody. Do I like myself when I'm with you? Do I like who I have to become in order to stay in connection with you? So that's something to think about. And then the second thing is, who are we becoming? Who are we becoming? How much of this screen-based interaction is shaping who we are becoming as citizens, as community members, as families? Because some of what happens on the screen and some of the propaganda and messaging and things like that, it has broken families up. It has broken families right down the middle. They don't celebrate the holidays together anymore. Their kids are not growing up as like cousins and play dates because it's like, nope. So I think it's always important to think about who you're becoming and who we're becoming. If you enjoyed this content, I invite you to subscribe, to share, and I will see you guys next time.